So as we have been going through this series on practicing faith, I have become very aware that November was going to be heavy. And so when I outlined the series this summer, and I sort of saw how the schedule came together, I knew that in November we were both going to talk about healing and forgiveness, two of my most difficult subjects. And then we had dying well. And I thought, man, November is going to be a doozy. But of course, back when the series started, it was summer. And so everything was alive, and things were in bloom. And it was warm, right? And I anticipated, I actually picked out this picture all the way back in summer and said, this will be perfect because it'll be fall, the earth will be going to sleep, it'll be perfect timing. And then the closer it got, the less I looked forward to talking about this. It's just one of those topics that no matter how much you prepare or how much advance notice you have, when it's actually time to talk about it, there can be tension that sneaks up on you. For some of you, you're thinking, if I had known that this is what we were going to be talking about today, I would have gone to Bedside Baptist. Church of the Inner Springs, if you will. I would have stayed at home. Sorry, I know. We're still sluggish from Thanksgiving. It's fine. I'll slow down.
Church of the Inner Springs.
Church of the Inner Springs. Thank you. So there's a saying that I was very aware of this week that in polite company you're not supposed to talk about two things. We've talked about this before. Religion and politics. But we've decided here we're going to talk about both. And there's another saying in our culture, which is the only two things you can't avoid are
death and taxes.
Death and taxes. Two things you just would rather avoid, but it's weird is they're the only two things you can't run from. And so I think if you can't talk about them when you're together as people of faith, where can you talk about them? So I'm hoping to facilitate and host a conversation today about these two really tricky things. No, we're not going to talk about taxes, I'm kidding. We're just going to talk about the first thing. We're going to talk about death. It has been interesting for me, knowing that this topic was coming, to watch the earth go to sleep. So as the garden starts to fold up, and as the flowers fade and go away, and as the trees shed their leaves, as the days get shorter and the nights get cooler, it has been dawning on me that as people who used to live on the land and in connection to the land, seasons were a part of life. But then I moved to Los Angeles. And the great thing about Los Angeles is that it's basically the same weather about 320 days out of the year. So any activity that you're into, you can do almost any day. But there's a spirituality, I've talked about this before, there's a spirituality that comes with it, where you sort of grow to expect that life will always be good. There will always be flourishing, there will always be blessing, there will always be harvest. And so one of the things that we have the privilege of doing in the Pacific Northwest is to cultivate a spirituality, and we let our environment set the pace for us. It's good for us from time to time to realize we need rest. As the earth rests, this is part of life. High tide and low tide. Full moon and new moon. Spring and fall. All of these are a part of life. It's good for us from time to time to allow this reality to set in and for us to have fruitful conversations about how we want to live and how we want to die. It's good for us, and the earth reminds us that this is a topic we have to cover. So let's embrace it together as we talk about this today. But I also want to acknowledge that we're having this conversation inside a church building. And one of the problems that people are having to face in churches like ours is that sometimes churches die. Churches don't live forever. And this also is a painful reality. And so people that we love pass on, institutions that we have counted on for our entire life come to an end and decline. Even the earth itself that gives us life is sick right now. And so there's probably no better time for us as a congregation to have this conversation and the reality of it. We lost one of our longtime members this week, Georgia Kohler. She passed into the Lord's presence in a new way to continue on the next chapter of her life. We have 3 people who are on hospice currently. This is an issue that is in our presence. It was already present this morning when we showed up. It's always already present. And so we have some talking to do. I'm hoping that this week that you, if you have the book, or if you don't, we can give you a chapter. We can copy this chapter for you. This is a conversation I would very much like to have. Some of you don't know this. This church almost died. A year and a half ago, this church had dropped below the point in weekly attendance that they say it can kind of sustain life. And so some decisions had to be made about putting this church on life support. One of the reasons we've made the changes that we have is that we had gotten to that point where they were starting to talk about church hospice. But we came back, baby. Right? This is a resurrection story. And now we're actually helping smaller churches in the area who were put on life support come back from the dead. So we have brother and sister churches that are experiencing resurrection. But some of you are a little traumatized by the fact that you didn't know we were going to get put on life support, or you didn't realize that we were coming to an end. And so that was a tragedy. That was a wake-up call that you were not prepared for. You didn't even realize we were sick. You thought we were just losing weight. that attendance was getting thinner, but you didn't know anything was wrong. And so these are conversations we have to have, both to celebrate together that we have come back from the deathbed, and that we have life, and we're starting to dream about what the next 10 and 20 and 50 years of this church can look like. That's exciting. But it comes from facing the stark reality that all of our vital signs were pointing to death. In fact, when I would go and sit with Jo, she would tell me about conversations that were being had behind the scenes where she said, look, we tried everything and we just didn't grow. It didn't work. But we really love each other. So let's keep doing this until there's no more of us. And then the last person who dies, just turn off the lights and turn the keys back over to the denomination. But that's not going to be our story. So let's have a different conversation. Not about dying well, let's have a conversation about living well. What do we want the next 10 and 20 and 30 years of this church to look like? And part of that comes by just being realistic with each other about our challenges and our opportunities, our passions, our vital signs. This is a conversation I want to host in the coming weeks. So I've very much been looking forward to this conversation all fall as I watch the earth go to sleep. But the closer it has gotten, the more intensity it has come with. So I want to pray for us. I hope that you will join in the conversation this week. I would love to have coffee or tea with you in the coming weeks and to talk about your hopes and dreams for both your life and for the life of faith we have together. I would love to hear about your dreams for ministry and reaching out to our community, and about letting people all over this area know about God's great love. I feel like we weathered the storm, and we've gotten through this, and we really love each other. We're committed to this cause. I mean, you're here on a Sunday morning, for Christ's sake. Literally, for Christ's sake. You are the committed. And so I would love to hear about your dreams and your hopes as we live and die in faith together. I'm not afraid of this conversation. You know, one of the great things about being undead is nothing really scares you. Once you've come through something like that, you realize what life is really about, and you can have a different kind of conversation. I'm not afraid to have that conversation, and I would love to dream with you about what life and faith can look like as we walk forward together. Will you pray with me? Lord of new life and possibilities, we thank you that even this fall we have experienced spring and warmth in our souls. And so we offer ourselves to you, that whatever phase of life we find ourselves in today, that in that phase we would be useful to the divine plan. That in the big story we would play a part that makes the world a better place. So we ask, will you, Spirit, inspire us to live well? To live well. And to live up to all of the days of possibility that are ahead of us. We ask this in Christ's name. Amen. Try to come